I am incredibly excited about the release of my upcoming book, Triggers. What's Triggers about? It's about creating behavior that lasts and becoming the person that you want to be. In my book, Triggers, I begin by talking about why we don't become the person we want to be. What are our delusions or belief triggers that keep us from becoming this person that we know that we could and should be? Then I talk about how we can relate to our environment and the triggers around us. And the goal of the book is really to help you focus on creating your own world as opposed to being created by the world around you. How do we deal with these triggers every day? How do we anticipate triggers? How do we learn to avoid triggers that push us in the wrong direction? How do we adjust to triggers? Then in the book, I'm going to share some very practical tools that you can take back to use. Simple tools, not easy tools. I'm going to share some tools that take you a very small amount of time. They take a lot of discipline. If you do it, you're going to be much more likely to become the person that you want to become. And again, the goal of the book is not to tell you who you want to be. The goal is to help you become the person that you in your heart think is the person that you want to be. In my book, Triggers, I talk about how we change the world and how the world changes us. And in my book, I talk about something called the monkey mind. And like a monkey leaping through the jungle from vine to vine, we kind of go from place to place with very little consciousness of why we're doing what we're doing. I have a funny example. I'm in my condominium in New York, and I have this beautiful 15th century Buddha. And I look at the Buddha and I think, what a nice Buddha. So I'm thinking, Buddha, Buddha. Then I think Buddhist. Then I think Buddhist art. Oh, I like Buddhist art. Then I think, Alex von Bitter, my friend. Alex loves Buddhist art. Then I think, oh, Alex has a restaurant, the Four Seasons restaurant in New York. Such tasty foods in the Four Seasons restaurants. Then I think my friend Frances Hesselbein, she loves to go to the restaurant with me. She's my good friend. So I think, why don't we go to the restaurant? I call my friend Frances. She's excited. Let's go to the restaurant. We get to the restaurant. What do? First thing, we sit down. Would you like souffles? Oh, yes. I'd like the chocolate one and one for the Grand Marnier, so we have one of each. Oh, we eat the huge meal, tasty souffles, wonderful food. I'm in a fine spirit. And I come home. And I see this goals for today, and one of it's about healthy eating. Gone, gone, gone. All gone because my monkey mind kicked in. I looked at Buddha and I ended up eating this huge amount of food, which I didn't plan for at all. Now, the only good news is I looked at Buddha and Buddha said to me, be happy, make peace, it is what it is. Well, not the end of the world, an important learning point though. We all have a monkey mind. The internet is the ultimate feeder of the monkey mind. Have you ever had this happen? You go online and you're going to go online for 2 or 3 minutes just to look something up. 3 hours later, you're still online. You don't even know why you went online in the first place. What happened is the internet is the ultimate amphetamine for the monkey mind. What happens? Oh, this is interesting. Oh, that little URL, that looks interesting. Click, 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 travel, travel, travel. And the next thing you know, we are completely lost. In my book, Triggers, I talk about one thing that's very important. As we journey through the day, keep what you want to do in front of you, because if we don't, what happens is triggers will send us in all kinds of directions. Our monkey mind will kick in, and we have no idea how that day is going to end. A friend of mine just sent me an interesting message. It was an article about China. It was an article about video game and media addiction. The article said 365 million people in China have a problem with video game or media addiction. 365 million. That's more than there are people here in the United States. This is one case where I was right and I wish I were wrong. 20 years ago, I wrote an article and I said, media addiction will surpass drug addiction and alcohol addiction combined as a social problem within 20 years. Why? We're going to have instant download, TV quality, audio-visual transmission over the internet. It's going to be so good that we can't turn it off. Unfortunately, I think I was correct. The average kid that's flunking out of school in the United States about 55 hours a week on non-academic media. Video games, internet surfing, Facebook, 55 hours a week. This is a disaster. 2 things. 1, yourself. Start measuring how many hours a day do you spend on non-professional media? How many hours a day do you spend on media that is not really helping anyone? And measure if you have children, how many hours a day your children spend on this? And again, when you start measuring, you realize how addictive this can become. In life, what's important? You need to be happy, and you also need to find meaning. The problem with media addiction, especially if it's not related to helping others, is it can lead to something I call amusing yourself to death. You're doing something that's amusing, you're doing something that passes time, you're not making the world a better place. And at the end, if we do too much of that, you might have an amusing life, you're going to have an empty life. I went to a presentation in front of a bunch of HR leaders, and 3 of the top HR people in the world did a presentation on employee engagement. And they talked about everything companies are doing to engage the employees. They talked about nothing employees could do to engage themselves. And that got me thinking about the topic, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. Maybe the challenge with employee engagement is not always the company, maybe it's the employee. For example, I have over 11 million frequent flyer miles on American Airlines. I'm on a typical flight, and one flight attendant's positive, motivated, upbeat, enthusiastic, one's negative, bitter, angry, and cynical. Have you ever been on that flight? Same plane, same uniform, same employee engagement program. What was the difference? Not what's on the outside, it's what's on the inside. I'm going to teach you a technique you can use in every meeting, in every interaction. It's going to make you happier. It's going to make you more engaged. Because on that 3-hour flight, that miserable flight attendant, the real loser is not just American Airlines or the customers. The real loser is the flight attendant who just lost 3 hours of their life being an unhappy person. Let me give you my case study. I want you to imagine you have to go to a meeting. A boring meeting, stupid PowerPoint slides. You're dreading the meeting. You hate going to this meeting. It's going to be so dull. Have you ever been to such a meeting? We've all been to the meeting. Now I want you to imagine at the end of the meeting, you're going to be tested on 4 questions. Each question begins with, did I do my best to? Number 1, be happy. Did I do my best to be happy? Number 2, find meaning. Number 3, build positive relationships. And number 4, be fully engaged. If you knew you were going to be tested on those 4 questions, would you behave differently and how? I've asked thousands of people from around the world that question. Never has a person said I would behave in exactly the same way. They've always said things like, I'd be more interested, I'd pay attention, I'd ask questions, I'd find someone to meet, I'd make sure I got something out of it. Then I always say, why don't you test yourself? Because if you're in that meeting and that hour is shot and you're miserable and disengaged, who's the loser? Back to our flight attendants. It's your hour. It's your hour. If you're in that meeting and you're miserable, it's your hour. I'm going to give you a challenge. You do challenge yourself at every meeting. Am I doing my best to be happy, to be finding meaning? Am I doing my best to be fully engaged, to build positive relationships? If you challenge yourself that way in every meeting, what's going to start happening? Number 1, you're going to be a much more productive member of the team. And number 2, you're going to have a better life. As we wander through life, we're constantly being bombarded by triggers from our environment. Some of these triggers help us go to where we want to go. A lot of the triggers take us away from the person that we want to become. One of the keys to mastering triggers is something called anticipation. Anticipation, what does this mean? Well, first I'm going to talk about how we use this as professionals for big events. For example, you're in an ad agency. You're going to make a pitch, a presentation to a very important client. You will prepare for everything. You will anticipate questions. You'll think about what could go wrong. You're going to be anticipating anything that could happen, any triggers that might come up, you're going to be ready for. You're a politician. You're making a big speech. You're going to anticipate what could happen in the audience, challenges you could get. You're a corporate CEO. You're going to be interviewed on CNBC. You're going to be prepared for any question they might ask. You're going to be ready. We usually anticipate the big things. Where we fall apart is what I'd call the small things, which could actually be more important. For example, you've had a hard day. You're under stress. You're in a bad mood. You go home. High probability someone says or does something that may set you off. You may react in a totally inappropriate way. Why? You haven't anticipated that this trigger could result in this bad behavior. Another example, you're trying to lose weight. Your friend goes, well, let's just go have a beer. Fine. What are the odds you're going to have 1? Maybe you have 2 beers, 3 beers. And then the other thing is the night is shot, the weight is gained. As we go through life, it's very important for us to anticipate What are the triggers that could steer me off course? What could possibly go wrong in that meeting? What possibly could go wrong when I go home? What possibly could go wrong with my friends, my family, with my diet, with my health? Plan for this, anticipate, and the more we can anticipate the triggers we're going to face in our environment, the more likely we are to deal with these in a positive way, and the more likely we are to become the person we want to be, create our own world, not be created by the world around us. As we journey through life, we are constantly bombarded by triggers from our environment. These triggers may set us off in a positive direction. In many cases, they take us away from becoming the person we want to be. They send us in a negative direction. One of the keys to becoming the person that we want to be is something called adjusting. Learning to adjust our behavior based on the reactions we're getting from our environment. Let me give you a very simple example that I use in the book. In the book, I talk about a woman named Sashi from India. And she's a graduate of the Indian Institute of Technology. She's a great engineer. She's brought up in a very poor part of the country. She works very hard. Her parents work very hard. She later goes on, gets an MBA from Stanford, and she becomes a director in a very prestigious high-tech organization. In the book, I talk about her going back home to India. And she goes home and she's in the village and talking with people that she was brought up with, and they're having a little reunion, and one of the people says, "What did you do last week?" And she says, "Oh, I had such a great week. I flew to Paris. I met this person who was a CEO, met many of the icons in our industry. I'm now on the high potential leadership track." She goes on and on about what she did. At the end of the evening, she's talking with a friend who was there named Ranjini. And Ranjini was talking to her, and she says, "Boy, that was so much fun. What a nice reunion." And Ranjini said, "Well, it might have been fun for you. I heard several of the people talking on the way out about what a show-off you were and how arrogant and how rude you've become." She said, "Well, what do you mean rude and arrogant? They just asked me what I did and I told them." Then Ranjini said, "How do you think it felt to them?" It felt like you were just rubbing their noses in everything that you've done. They haven't been to Paris. They haven't worked with CEOs. It really didn't make them feel good. Well, she was angry for quite a while until she finally reflected and realized her friend was right. Her friend was being a true friend and telling her the truth. What did she learn to do? The next time she was back in the village and someone said, "What did you do last week?" She said, "Well, I worked hard, I traveled some. What did you do last week?" And she really started focusing her energy not on, "Let's talk about me." She focused her energy on, "Let's talk about your life. Let's talk about what you did. Let me show some interest in you and make it more about you." This is what's called adjusting. As we go through life, we're going to get messages from our environment, triggers that shift us one way or the other. Important to learn to listen to these triggers, learn from them, and adjust our behavior to become the person that we want to become. In my role as an executive coach, I've had the privilege of working with many, many wonderful leaders from around the world. One of the greatest leaders I've ever met is a man named Alan Mulally. Alan retired recently as the CEO of the Ford Motor Company and was listed in Fortune magazine as the #3 greatest leader in the world, behind only the Pope and Angela Merkel. And also, Alan was ranked as once the CEO of the Year in the United States. On top of that, he's just a great guy. Alan has taught me many things about leadership, and one thing he's done with his team I find amazing: creating a new culture. And what he's done is work with his team to develop what they consider to be the optimal team behaviors. What he's done different, though, is he has rules: zero tolerance for bad behavior, positive reinforcement for the right behavior. For example, in his team, if someone uses the cell phone, he stops the meeting. He says, "Excuse me, is there something on that cell phone you need to share with everybody?" If two people have a side conversation, stops the meeting. "Is there something you two want to share with the group?" People don't make sarcastic comments. One of his rules: you don't have humor at someone else's expense. Well, what Alan has done in a phenomenal way is create an incredibly positive environment. And how's he done it? He's worked with his team. They've established clear rules for behavior. And what he's done better than any leader I have ever seen in my life is he has zero tolerance for bad behavior. Now, I've worked in companies before that have zero tolerance for integrity violations, and I think that's a great thing. You should have no tolerance for integrity violations. I have never in my life seen a CEO who's enforced the same rules for behavior, and let me tell you something, it works. If you want to create a great culture, figure out the behaviors associated with that great culture. Have rules, have everybody sign up to the same plan, and then the most important point, make sure every leader in that company is a role model for demonstrating every one of those good behaviors and have zero tolerance for those bad behaviors. The leader as facilitator. My friend Alan Mulally, former CEO of Ford, fantastic leader, has been teaching me about a process called the leader as facilitator, and I'll have to say I've never seen anyone implement this in the way he has, and by the way, with fantastic results. How does it work? Well, in his team, he has every team member make a presentation on each of their key objectives. Red, which means there's a problem and I don't have a solution. Yellow, which means there's a problem and I have a strategy to deal with it. Or green means I'm on plan. Instinctively, most leaders feel they need to jump in and provide the solution rather than be a facilitator and help people. Alan's approach is what I call as close to egoless as I've ever seen, no ego. What does he do? When someone presents a problem, rather than him leaping in and giving the answer, Alan's tendency is to say, we have a lot of resources in this corporation. Who in the room can help this person? Or who knows someone who can help this person? And Alan's attitude is, why should I, as the CEO, believe that I am so smart and so wonderful that I need to provide the answers when I manage an incredible group of talented people? Many of them may be able to provide an answer that's just as good as mine or perhaps even better. Well, what he's done is create an environment where two things happen. One, people are free to talk about their issues, concerns, and problems. Many leaders say, don't come to me with a problem, come to me with a solution. I don't want to hear your problems if you don't have a solution. Well, when we say that to leaders, don't we teach them? If you have a problem and you don't have an answer, hide it. Alan's attitude is, if you have a problem and you don't have an answer, it's okay. Let's just tell the truth here. Get it out on the table. And he's a facilitator and a mobilizer. His goal then is, let's mobilize all the resources we can to help this person solve their problem. And what he does as a facilitator is he fights the urge to solve every problem himself, because he realizes just because he's the leader doesn't mean he always has the right answer or the best answer. His job is to find the answer, not be that person who always has to provide the answer.